4. Let's do this. Hey, welcome everybody to week 5 of the virtual CITN conference slash meeting slash whatever we're doing here online. This is the last installment for 2020. We will be sending out a survey to everybody to ask about what your feedback is for how things have ran. Do you want to see this continue into 2021, et cetera, yada, yada. Today, we're talking security. Monster props to Travis Phipps from Enable, Chris Green from Bima. They're going to be sharing and demoing some fun stuff. And with that, Travis, it is all you, my friend.
Well, I appreciate that excellent intro, and unfortunately now Zoom doesn't want to let share my PowerPoint screen. So bear with me for just a second. I'm going to see if I can get that to work again.
Do you need an IT guy?
So much for testing ahead of time. That totally worked before.
It worked before, yeah.
I know, but I don't see. Come on. I don't see the file open. There we go. Task manager to the rescue. Yeah. Never going to be invited back to present again. Hey, we got it. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks, Jason and CITN team for the opportunity. Happy to be talking about security in churches. I know it's our favorite thing to talk about. You guys most of you have seen me or heard me present before, so you know that I don't talk slowly, but I did try to whittle this down. I have only 14 slides this time as opposed to like the 30 I had last time, so we'll see if that works better or not. Because I do have, unfortunately, another meeting to jump into at 2 o'clock. So with that out of the way, let's just dive right in, why don't we? Let me start with this. The goal today is not to give an exhaustive list of everything you should be doing to secure your technology infrastructure. It's to give you the highlights of the things primarily that are the easy wins, the things that should be easy for you to implement. Many of these cost you nothing. Let me reiterate, you don't have to spend any money for them, which means you really have no excuses for not doing them beyond the ones that you make up yourself and you convince yourself of. And so hopefully today, as we talk, we'll unconvince you of the problems and you will figure out that this is totally easy to do. To that end, I'm going to start off here with a couple of famous quotes that you might or might not have heard before. The first one is from our friend Tyler Vance at Life Church. This is something that he posted recently, and I was like, man, I love that. Can I steal this? He said, churches, specifically speaking of churches, we deal in the commodity of trust and should steward that with excellence. So if you're wondering why you should worry about this, or you're trying to teach and explain to your leadership why you should worry about this, that's it right there. You deal in the commodity of trust and you need to steward that with excellence. I love that statement. I think it succinctly summarizes why you should care about these things and why your leadership needs to care about these things and help empower you to go make some of these changes. And then our friend Carl here, we'll refer back to some of these in the future, but I just wanted to bring up Carl's perspective. We should be tearing down anything we don't need anymore. Love that. Love that. Eliminate the complexity, get rid of the old legacy just because. Quit coming up with excuses. And then he further emphasizes, you can do it. Why do you think you can't? What we see oftentimes in talking to churches is that they have convinced themselves that these changes are too big, too bold, too broad, their people won't put up with them, whatever. The day of excuses has to be over. You have to understand that you can do these things. They are not as big and scary as you think they are. And there are other friends within the church IT community that you can talk to that have done it, that can help you. There are consultants like Carl and Chris and myself and many others that can help you if you need the help. Or you can just spend an afternoon and go learn how to do it and get it done. All right, so with that out of the way, the number one thing, you have got to change the conversation amongst your staff. Your staff have to be taught and have to be trained. If your staff are only hearing about security vulnerabilities and security risks and threats from the nightly news, then you are not doing your job as a technology leader in your organization. You have got to be framing the conversation and teaching your people what they need to know. You don't have to scare them, although that sometimes helps free up resources, if I'm being honest, but you do need to explain it to them in a way that they can understand it, because you can have all the best technology bells and whistles in the world, and then something, happens and you realize that your biggest vulnerability was your person that clicked on the link, or COVID that sent everybody home. So now your fancy firewall does you absolutely no good because your workstations aren't behind your fancy firewall anymore, right? So don't pin all your hopes and dreams on your technology. Pin it on training and educating your staff and changing the culture and the conversation amongst your team. By the way, if you have thoughts, comments, questions as I'm going through these things, obviously I'm going to run through my slides and get through them, but be putting stuff in chat. Be having conversations in chat or posing questions for me or others. I would love to hear what you think about this or some of the ways that you've handled this. Specifically around the training, let me just offer this. There are programs, there are websites, there are applications that you can subscribe to that can do this training. I will tell you right now that in church culture, we have found that to not be terribly effective. The most effective mechanism has been communication from the technology leader in the organization to the staff. That generally is going to come by way of emails that are short and sweet and simple to digest, and actual live conversational training. So get 15 minutes in your next staff meeting to talk about the biggest threat or the biggest weakness that you see with your staff. Spend time and make that a part of your normal routine, talking about it and bringing it up. Church people, funny enough, tend to learn when somebody stands in front of them and talks to them. Imagine that. It's almost like they do it every single week. Imagine that that's how they learn best. Go figure. All right. Culture and strategy, right? So you can have all the greatest strategy in the world around technology and how you're going to protect it all, but you've got to change the culture, right? You've got to change the narrative. So these are just some things that you need to be talking about and you need to be teaching your staff. You need to be talking about the 90-10 rule, right? You need to be talking about the email. Okay, so I just read Jason's comment that said Paceman, and I thought he was telling me to slow down and then realized he meant Pac-Man. So I'm just going to keep going at the speed that I'm going. Is that good? Yeah?
Flipping autocorrect. Dang it.
Sorry, I'm easily distracted by comments. They pop right up in front of my arrow. You need to be teaching people about the email red flags, which is the things they should be looking for. Make sure the from address is the right address. Make sure when they hover over a link, it's a legitimate, correct link, those kinds of things. You need to be telling people what social engineering is and explaining how it might come to them. You need to be teaching your people what it means to be phished versus being hacked. People get phished all day long. Whether they fall for that phishing may just depend on how well you train them about it, right? But you don't want them always coming and screaming, I've been hacked, I've been hacked, I've been hacked, when all they did was get a piece of junk phish email, right? So you need to teach them a difference. You need to teach them about passwords and how to use them and all of that. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And you need to teach them about how to appropriately use texting and emailing and IM and what's more secure than another or not, and how to verify things via a phone call rather than trusting emails. These are not hard things, and these are things we take for granted as technologists. Your people don't know any better unless you are telling them about it. Oh, and by the way, my controversial opinion here. Don't comment if you disagree with me. I'm just kidding. I honestly find no value whatsoever in personal VPNs. I think they're stupid. I think they actually create a bigger weakness for you and your organization and your people. All the services that you're offering to them officially should be TLS encrypted, right? So what's the VPN doing for you? I'll just leave it right there. I'm not saying it's worthless. I'm just saying it's not as beneficial as it's not this magic silver bullet that I think it always gets made out to be. And I think it gives people a false sense of security, and that's a bad thing. So what about passwords? You should use them. They should be strong. Maybe passphrases instead of passwords, meaning, long string of words put together, something that's easier for them to remember, but that can be crazy and off the wall. That tends to work better than passwords because, by the way, the longer it is, the more secure it is, just overall. So that resonates well with people if you can teach them the passphrase idea. You need to teach them that, passwords are like underwear. You never share them with anybody. Nobody else should see them. You should change them often, that whole thing. You should teach your people to use a password manager. You should educate them. Maybe your organization should actually provide a password manager for your staff to use. Some organizations do and some don't. I don't really kind of have a preference on that, but your people need to understand that they should be using one, and they need to know why, right? They need to know that they need unique passwords for each thing, that they all need to be strong, yada, yada, yada. Here's another controversial opinion. Church staff, their passwords should expire. Now, I'm not saying every 90 days. I think that's too much. I think that every 180 or every 365 is probably a nice balanced middle ground for church staff. And yeah. Before anybody says it, I know NIST says don't do it. Microsoft says don't do it. They don't primarily work with church staff who have volunteers who they give their password to every single week. So you show me the church staff that's not sharing their password to volunteers, and I'll give you my permission to make an exception to this rule. But I've yet to meet the church that does not have staff members that share their password with volunteers, with family members, with whatever. And as long as that's still true, then I'm going to make them change their password every so often. Just being real. All right. Carl, you're jumping ahead of me in the chat there, buddy. Of course, I'm going to talk about MFA, but since you did, I can't click to the next slide. Zoom really needs to fix this. This whole only one way to advance the slides and the chat bubble gets in the way of it is kind of not good. All right, see, multi-factor authentication. You should do it now. You should have it on everything that will allow you to have it. Google Workspace, Microsoft 365, your church management system, your financial accounting system, everything that you can MFA, you should MFNA it. I'm just saying, right? It's not that hard. Your people can do it, I promise. I have personally helped some of the largest churches in this country implement it across their entire staff. I guarantee you they have a worse Betty Sue on their staff than you have on yours, and we made it happen. I'm talking organizations that have 300, 500, 600, 700 staff with MFA globally enabled for everybody. Not everybody has a smart device. Some of them are literally doing the phone call method. It is possible, it is doable, and every good platform out there has MFA available at no added cost. Bonus points, if you can integrate your Google or Microsoft system account as a single sign-on system for some of those other systems. So now you put MFA on your Google or Microsoft account, and all of these other systems where the users are signing in with those accounts automatically have MFA as well. And it's one less password they have to remember and keep up with, and you have to reset when they forget it. So there are no excuses, just being honest. It's doable. It's not always easy. I'm not going to lie to you. The setup process can be a little painful, but once it's enabled and once it becomes part of standard culture, you don't hear about it ever again. It really is that easy. All right. Email filtering. You should have it, obviously. I'm going to assume whatever mail platform you're using has some kind of spam filter built into it. They all do these days. You might have an extra layer. If we could get everybody to go ahead and mute. I love hearing little kid voices in the background, but it's making me not able to hear myself. Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. So email filtering, you need it. Spam filtering, you got it. Don't just run with the defaults. Spend some time tweaking it and tuning it to make it work best for you and your organization. Make sure that you are implementing things like SPF with hard fail, not just the little tilde soft fail, right? Make sure you're implementing DKIM and DMARC. And if you don't know what those are, Bing it. You can totally find it. I'm sorry, Google it. Yeah, sorry. You can totally find instructions on how to do this. And if you're using Google or Microsoft 365, which I would bet most of you are, these are not hard to implement. They have made it very easy. Do it. You will dramatically improve the security of your email platform. But also recognize that in this day and age, you can do all the training in the world, you can do all the educating in the world, and you should. But it is also helpful to have another tool that can help take a look at email, not just from a junk mail or spam perspective, but actually looking for behavioral patterns to identify phishing emails. Now, if you've heard me present or talk before or been in Slack, I'm sure you've heard me talk about iron scales. Yeah, I'm a fanboy. I can't help it. I really like what iron scales provides. It's not foolproof. It is not the only solution out there. Microsoft has their ATP solution that can do a lot of the same things. I don't think ATP is as user-friendly or as effective, just to be honest, but it works and it helps for sure. But Iron Scales, which we're going to get a demo from somebody that's going to show us Iron Scales a little bit later on this afternoon. Iron Scales is incredible at what it does. And here's the biggest thing for me. Iron Scales is so visible to the end user and just so automatically in their face that, remember I said earlier, you've got to change the culture. You've got to change the narrative so that users in your organization understand a security mindset around IT. And having a tool like Iron Scales that kind of keeps it front of mind and in their face periodically causes them to think about it more. And ultimately, that's the biggest win, in my opinion, from tools like Iron Scales, is because it's visible, the users are having to see it and having to interact with it, and it's keeping security front of mind for them, so they don't think that it's just IT's responsibility to deal with it. All right. So those are some user things that we were talking about. Now let's talk about systems. So this would be workstations and servers, depending on what we're talking about. You need to do the normal, common, everyday things. And this is honestly where I see a lot of churches fail, because they take some of these things for granted. They kind of just sweep this under the rug because it's kind of the menial, help desky kind of task, and they don't want to deal with it. Patch your crap. If you can't tell me right now how you're patching your workstations, and if you can't tell me within 15 minutes how effective or how what patch level you're at across your organization, you need to up your game. I'm just being honest. There's great tools that can help you do this, some free, some that cost money. There's great solutions that you can implement yourself, or you can engage with great folks like Bima and Able, and I don't know, Vibrant may do this in the church space too. I don't want to say they do or don't. You need to take care of your stuff. It's just too easy to patch your things to not be doing it. And it is by far the easiest way to find yourself vulnerable, is by not patching your stuff. Enough said. You should back up your stuff. Take care of the 3-2-1 rule for backups. In case you don't know what that is, 3 copies of your data. One of them is the production copy. One of them is on another kind of storage medium, and one of them is offsite. 3-2-1. Right? So 2 different storage mediums of some kind, 1 copy that's offsite, but there's 3 total copies. That's the 3-2-1 rule. That is the ideal way to be protecting and backing up your data. What about cloud data? I get asked this all the time. Can we back up Microsoft 365? Can we back up Google Workspace? Yes, you can. Should we back up Google Workspace and Microsoft 365? You need to make an informed decision about that. I will offer this advice. If you haven't done all the other things I just talked about, and if you're not doing simple things like replacing user workstations in a reasonable time frame, then I would not invest money in backing up what's already being protected by these cloud vendors. That's my opinion. But I think a lot of times churches want to just go spend money on security rather than doing security. You need to do security and not just think you can throw money at magic silver bullets. Iron Scales might be the one exception that seems to be like mysterious magic. And yes, you throw money at it, but it actually works. Encryption. You should be encrypting, especially your portable devices. We encrypt every workstation, desktop or laptop. It's just too easy to use BitLocker, so there's really no excuse not to. File Vault, not quite as easy, but if you have a good MDM platform, you can manage that too, and you should. Continuing system protections, you need antivirus. I hope everybody understands and hears me on that. You need an antivirus solution. But these days, just basic antivirus is probably not enough. You want a more advanced solution that can do additional things, like maybe some basic web filtering, definitely some kind of behavioral pattern matching beyond just basic signature-based antivirus. Most common solutions you hear about these days have some of these features already in them. But if you're relying on just the free stuff that's built into Windows and Mac OS, I would encourage you to explore something a little more capable. EDR, you may have heard endpoint detection and response. That's a kind of an up-and-comer thing in the endpoint protection space. It adds advanced diagnostic tracing. So think the ability to watch after a system got infected, what happened? What files did it touch? Where did it affect them? How did it encrypt them? And like literally seeing that mapped out and laid out in a timeline. That's a real thing that you can have if you're willing to pay for it. And then the really cool part is the ability to push a button and have it undo all that to just put it all back. That's cool. It costs you something, but it really is nice. All right. Oops. Networks. You should still be protecting your networks. I mentioned earlier how all of your workstations are no longer on your network because they're all working from home, but you still need to protect your networks because there is still stuff that goes on there, right? So you need a firewall that can do some extra things, my opinion, not just basic port blocking, right? Having the ability to content filter, especially if you offer guest wireless and things like that, but even gateway antivirus, intrusion detection and prevention. One of my favorites, geo IP filtering. You want to cut down on the noise you see hitting some of your open ports. Start blocking all the countries that aren't US. Start blocking all the IP addresses that are from other countries, and you will dramatically see a reduction in your logs of the crap that hits your firewall or your systems that are open to the internet. Wi-Fi, separate stuff. I hope that's a given. You should not be letting your guests and your volunteers jump on the same wireless network that your staff are using, as long as that network has access to protected resources. I'll refer back to previous conversations that maybe if you get to a full zero trust, maybe you only have one wireless network and then you don't care. But for most churches, there's still some stuff that you're protecting in an isolated VLAN of some sorts. And so you want to separate those traffic, those users. And client isolation. I think a lot of people take this for granted, don't understand it or whatever. So let me just nutshell it for you. Imagine that you have a guest network with no password on it. Anybody can drive by and roll up in your parking lot and jump on your Wi-Fi. That's cool. That's very accessible. It's very, kind of you to give that away. The last thing you want is for somebody to drive up in your parking lot and then be probing and attempting to hack your other guest Wi-Fi users. So imagine if every device had its own little personal firewall that surrounded it as it was connected to your guest network, so that the device could talk to the internet and nothing else, right? So nobody can talk to other people on the network because they are isolated clients. That's what client isolation is. So use it. If you're not using it, get it turned on. It also can reduce noise and so many other things to improve the efficiency of your network at the same time. So to Carl's quote earlier about, getting rid of the old things, get rid of your old crap. I won't ask for a show of hands, but I guarantee you probably every single person on this call can raise their hand and say that they have some old server that's still out there because it got used once a year, or some old printer that gets used 3 times a year, or there's always old stuff. And unfortunately, I think a lot of times the old stuff just gets left around because it's just easy to just leave it and then it doesn't, ruffle people's feathers. But it's that old crap that's leaving you vulnerable. It's the old crap that gets forgotten that is too easy to compromise. And part of removing old crap is not just to get rid of old because it's old, but it's to reduce your attack surface and reduce the complexity in your environment. So the less stuff you have, if something breaks, there's less for you to have to troubleshoot, right? It's common sense. So do what you can, especially as you SaaS all the things and move all the things into the cloud. Don't forget to go turn off and get rid of the old stuff that you're not using anymore. All right. Slide 11 to 14. I think we're going to make it. Here we go. Microsoft 365. If you are using Microsoft 365, don't just assume that out of the gate it is perfectly secure. Microsoft does a good job and they've got some good basic defaults, but don't just trust them out of the gate. There are some simple basic things, and these are just a few of them, by the way, that you can do that can improve your security posture. One is turn on the unified audit log. Google it, Bing it, it's not hard. turn it on, because if something is happening, you want to be able to know how and when and where and why and all of those things. Disable all legacy authentication. Now, Microsoft is, these last few bullets, Microsoft is kind of moving ahead with helping us do some of this by default, but you can get ahead of the game and get ahead of the curve. I will just tell you right now that the vast majority of actual compromised accounts in the Microsoft 365 ecosystem do not come about because somebody is typing into the website to log in and impersonate a user. They come about through automations and scripted connections to things like SMTP, POP, and IMAP. And they are using legacy or basic authentication methods, simple username, password. By the way, just because you turned on MFA for your users does not mean that people can't still use these legacy protocols with legacy authentication, bypassing all your fancy MFA-ness. So if you're MFA-ing everything, go run the reports and look and see if anybody's using these legacy protocols and legacy authentications. Most likely they're not doing it for any real legitimate need. Maybe they're doing it because they just like to use that old Android Mail app. It's okay to tell them they can't use that old Android Mail app and turn this crap off. All right, some other things to think about then. We've talked about a lot of the basics, a lot of the simple, most of which are free and don't cost you anything. These are some things that are going to cost you money. These are some things that I think a lot of times people don't understand, or they've heard the terminology thrown around. So I want to just take a couple minutes to explain them. So hopefully you at least know what they are and what they do. Anyway, so that's the point. Cyber insurance. That's insurance that protects you from cyber attacks, right? And that could be a myriad of things, even as simple data loss. And you can have insurance policies that help cover this. You need to be having conversations with your business office or whoever is responsible for your overall insurance for the church. And you need to find out if you already have cyber liability insurance included in some of your existing policies, or if maybe it can be added as a rider to some of your existing insurance policies. Those are the most common ways we see churches get this coverage. And in some cases, you can go get a completely separate policy just for this. But I highly encourage you to do it. It doesn't cost a whole lot, although it's costing more every day there's another breach, whatever. But it is still worthwhile to have. Network vulnerability scans. So a network vulnerability scan or a security vulnerability scan simply means some tool that is going to go run a scan trying to probe each IP address in your network, looking for common known exploitable vulnerabilities. So if it pings a thing and it figures out that that's a Cisco switch, then it's going to attempt to connect on known vulnerabilities. It's going to attempt to do the basic buffer overflow exploit or whatever is known to potentially be vulnerable in that type of device. And good ones can scan Linux devices and Mac OS and Windows and switches and firewalls and wireless controllers and HVAC controllers and all the things that have IP addresses in your environment. And so it's good to know if you have common and known vulnerabilities. What's unfortunate is that a lot of those you're going to find out there's no patch for it. So now you're stuck in the position of, well, what do I do about that? There's some great options. You can isolate things. There's all sorts of things you can do, but you got to start with knowing where you have vulnerabilities. And that's the point of a network vulnerability scan. Generally, those are going to be done on some kind of schedule, but it may not be like it's constantly running. Maybe you have it done once a year, or you have it done once a quarter, or once a month, or you pick your poison on that. But it is not a one and done kind of thing. You want to scan it, know what your vulnerabilities are, work to remediate, and then have it done again, right? Security Information and Event Management, SIEM, sometimes pronounced SIEM. Depends on the day, I say both. I don't know which is correct, but there you go. So you may have heard this terminology before. It's a fancy way of saying log aggregation with machine learning normally as a component. Technically, System Information and Event Management is all about the gathering of log files from your firewalls and your switches and your servers and even your endpoints and your antivirus, whatever can generate logs. You want to feed it all into one big bucket so that you have one place where things can be correlated and searched and patterns can be spotted. Ideally, you hope nobody spots a pattern that is a known indicator of compromise, or IOC. But the whole point would be you put all the logs in one bucket. So you're not just looking at vulnerabilities on one little box or activities on one box at a time. You're looking in aggregate across your entire environment. So most SIEM solutions are going to be coupled with some kind of automated algorithms that are going to search and look for these known indicators of compromise, known behavior patterns that look like bad things. They're also often going to be bundled with a SOC service or a security operations center. I don't know of a church in the United States that really can afford or should invest in their own dedicated team of SOC people, but there are plenty of great solutions out there that can be contract based, where you can hire the experts to do it on your behalf. And I'm sure that Chris and Carl and myself would be more than happy to talk to you about solutions that might be available. It's kind of amazing, some of the things that you get to see when someone is really able to aggregate all of your information across the board. Look for things like, hey, we see a lot of traffic that's running over this port. Hey, we noticed that you've got connections coming in from TeamViewer. Do you really use that application in your environment? Things like that that you wouldn't have visibility to, but by correlating all this information, applying machine learning and actual security experts, human eyes, evaluating things, they can give you insight and point out things you might need to worry about. Dark web monitoring. This is a fancy way of saying they go and they take your email domain and they scan known dark web sites where things get posted like password dumps. And so they can alert you if your email addresses are showing up in password dumps. Pen testing. So pen testing is generally not just an automated process, it's a human-driven process. And the point of a pen test is very simple. Keep pushing and keep hacking and keep going until you make it all the way to domain admin or global admin. If you're paying for a pen test, you're going to fail. You're paying to fail. What you hope is that you don't fail in 5 minutes. And if you fail the first time in 5 minutes, what you hope is the next time you don't fail in 5 minutes again, right? So the point of a pen test is they're going to find a weakness. They're going to find a vulnerability. And then you're going to go fix the things that they found, and then you're going to have it done again. Just be prepared to get a good pen test. You're talking minimum, the cheapest I've ever seen, 10 grand, generally closer to 15 to 20 grand to get a good pen test. This is not something I advise most churches to dive into. Do all the other things we talked about first. There's no reason to have somebody come tell you when you're weak if you're not already doing MFA and some of these other things we've talked about. Oh, by the way, have I mentioned, change your culture. You need to be talking about it. You need to be teaching your people about it. You need to change the culture in your organization. And that starts with changing it with your leadership. You need to be able to explain in non-technical terminology what the risks are to your organization and what happens if you're compromised. You need to be able to explain that IT cannot secure the network alone. Everybody has to participate, and you just need to keep it front of mind. And I'll close with this. You are dealing in the commodity of trust, and you need to steward that with excellence. You need to tear down anything you don't need anymore, and you absolutely can do it. Don't tell Carl that you can't. All right. So I know there's a lot of chat going on. I know that Taylor is hopefully joining us or has joined us, is going to give us an iron scales rundown in just a minute. Did anybody see anything in chat that I ought to address really quickly?
Travis, I want to add something to your list you were giving us a few moments ago on the cyber insurance front and all of the bullet points that came after that. Quite often, we don't find out that cyber insurance is involved until somebody comes to us with the questionnaire they're getting in year 2 or 3 and asking all the things that they're doing, because somebody signed an agreement that said they were doing all these things and you're not. So it is very, very important that you reach out to your business team and find out what they are paying for and look at those terms, because what will happen is somebody just checks a box and says, sure, we have an IT department, they do all those things. And you may very well be agreeing that you have policies in place for things that you don't have policies in place for. You may be agreeing that you're doing quarterly vulnerability scans and annual pen tests, and you might be agreeing to a lot of those things and you don't even know it, and they will bite you on the tail end if something happens and the insurance won't pay out. So it is important to know whether you have that or not if you don't.
Excellent points. Thanks, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm scanning chat. Someone asked me my favorite antivirus. I avoid normally talking about specific brands, except I guess IronScales. I will say that at Enable, we use Bitdefender Gravity Zone. We have tried others and had good success, some not so much. But Bitdefender is our current preference. It works well for an MSP style multi-tenant environment. We have found it very effective. And they also, I noticed that Chris gave some examples of endpoint detection and response tools. SentinelOne, CrowdStrike. Bitdefender also has an EDR offering that's kind of an add-on feature. There are others as well. Let's see, with many churches now doing some instances of church online, how would you implement geo-located IP blocking? Oh, that's a great question, Tyler. I would outsource your website to somebody else so that you don't have to worry about geo IP blocking your live stream website. So for things that are publicly accessible at scale, generally most churches are not hosting those things on site. They are providing those things through some hosted platform that is already doing other protections, so that hopefully they're spending more on security, right, than you could. But also, if they were compromised, you're compromising a live stream website, not compromising inside of an internal church network, which gives more lateral movement capabilities, which is really what you want to try to prevent. Client isolation does affect the ability to use Apple TVs. I don't view that as a negative, but yes, it absolutely does do that. It does require some different architecture there.
I'll throw an answer into that in the chat in just a second.
Okay, cool. And I can't read Carl's novel that he wrote to Tyler at the end. I don't have time for that. So with that, we have asked Taylor Kunkel to join us. Taylor, are you already on the call with us?
I am indeed.
Okay, awesome. So I am going to happily and kindly turn this over to Taylor, who is going to give us a demonstration of the IronScales platform. So Chris Green from BEMA invited Taylor to join us to give us this demo. Taylor works for an organization that helps companies like BEMA and Enable resell tools like IronScales. BEMA and Enable, Chris and I both love IronScales. We both would be more than happy to sell it to anybody that's on this call and any other church in the world. But now Taylor's going to show you why it's so awesome and you all should want it. So take it away, Taylor.
Thank you very much, Travis, for the introduction. Really appreciate that. So yeah, I'm a security solutions consultant at Pax8. So I work with Chris. He's one of my partners, and essentially act as a consultant, helping him identify opportunities and potential fits for his business and customers. So I'm not from IronScales, and I do have another IronScales demo to actually run at the top of the hour, but because I have this, such a little time, I'm really just going to go over a presentation highlighting the benefits, features, and kind of how it fits into both MSP or partners business as well as the end user. So can everyone see my screen? Yep, perfect. Okay. So IronScales, world's first automated phishing prevention, detection, and response platform. There have been a number of imitators that have followed suit now. I'm sure some of you have heard like Inky or Evade Secure, even KnowBe4 now released a similar platform. So the agenda for this, and hopefully I can run through this whole presentation, but kind of go over IronScales strengths and all the different features with it. Along with the licensing that's available for the end users and what's entailed within each package. And then what is Ninja, which is a new platform that IronScales is utilizing as a third-party vendor that they incorporated into their solution. So this is a little animated slide that one of our people at PAX8 actually created. And this is, I'm sure a lot of you understand this and it's pretty elementary, but this is the basics of your cloud email environment and how the traditional way to secure that environment would be with Office 365, and this also works with G Suite too as well. But traditionally, you would utilize an email gateway, such as like a Proofpoint or a Mimecast, and those are pre-delivery solutions. So when an email is sent to your inbox, it'll first go through that email gateway, and it'll do the scanning. Any spam or malware will automatically be blocked. But where IronScales differentiates itself is that it is API based. It's a post-delivery solution. So it actually connects to Office 365 or G Suite via APIs and is constantly scanning the end user's inbox. There's a lot of benefits associated with that. So if something were able to get through your email gateway, such as like a polymorphic attack that's in there to begin with, IronScales is that extra layer of protection that will be able to detect that. So for a lot of partners, they're actually utilizing IronScales on top of an email gateway solution, while some are just relying on IronScales by itself. And with IronScales, this is kind of highlighting right here their single-click remediation, which I'll cover later in detail. But spam, malware, data loss prevention, encryption, that's really what your email gateways protect and cover. IronScales is solely focused on phishing. It's not a spam filter. They're not really worried about anything else but phishing. And as I'm sure most of you are aware, this is the #1 threat when it comes to email today. In fact, 90% of ransomware, it comes from phishing-based attacks. And in this remote landscape environment during this pandemic, it is more important than ever to provide some protection when it comes to phishing attacks. So with IronScales, and this is kind of an older presentation that I've kind of tweaked a little bit. This is a little short notice for me, but this should cover everything. This is the core platform when IronScales was first released. So they had 3 main components, which is Iron Sites, and that's their heuristics and in-mail banners, their single-click threat remediation, which I can't stress enough, this is probably the single biggest benefit for IT administrators, just because of the amount of time that it saved, as well as reducing the potential for an end user to actually get phished. And then their crowdsourcing threat intelligence, which is Federation. So Iron Sights, and one thing too, IronScales does do security awareness training for phishing, but this is really taking the onus off of the end user, because as I'm sure a lot of you know, people will just click through the trainings just to get through and meet the requirements and satisfy their manager and not really retain or digest any of the information. So this kind of takes some of that off of their plate. But this is what an email, if someone was sent a phishing email and IronScales heuristics detects something is suspicious, it'll put a big red in-mail banner on there. And as soon as an end user sees that, almost 100% of the time, they're going to report this phishing email. And there's 8 different banners that IronScales has, and I'll show some of those here at the end. Now, Iron Traps, this is the single-click remediation. So after a user reports that phishing email or potential phishing attack, the IT administrator, whether that's someone, an MSP or an IT worker at the customer, they will be able to look at the quarantine digest and see a detailed analysis of every single email that was reported. And you get a lot of analytics to really determine whether or not it's a false positive or in fact a phishing threat. And from here, you can either mark it as a phishing attack, and this is where the single remediation comes into effect. This will actually pull every single email that was this email that was sent to an end user's inbox. I know traditionally this can be a time-consuming task. It's not that it's complicated or hard to do, but it takes some time to identify which users got this email. But with this, with a single click, you can pull that from every affected inbox. Or if it is a false positive, you mark it as a false positive and it gets sent back. Next up, we have Federation. So this is their crowdsourcing component. Now, prior to IronScales working with Pax8, we are the sole distributor, but they were in the enterprise space only. They're based out of Tel Aviv, so they have a security background, and they work with some of the largest corporations across the globe. And so the benefit of that is your customers, if any of these large enterprises are hit with some of these most sophisticated phishing attacks out there, and they are reported as actual legitimate threats, any phishing attacks that have been verified as legitimate threats will actually be blocked from the end user's inbox. They won't even make it in there. The suspicious emails are the ones that are the 0-day threats that haven't been seen before or reported. So your customers benefit from, or the end users benefit from all of that and from all that crowdsourcing information from small MS or small businesses such as churches to the largest corporations. So I can't stress enough that IronScales is really built for the ever-evolving phishing threats that we're seeing on a daily basis. So kind of highlighting some of the strengths here with IronScales. So as I mentioned, it's API based. This is really where we see email security evolving and trending towards, and email gateway solutions are eventually going to be phased out for a number of reasons. But one of the biggest benefits as far as time is concerned is it doesn't require MX redirect. The deployment is extremely simple, takes less than 10 minutes to get up and running for an entire organization. So it also has Office 365 integration when it comes to deployment, so it can use Azure Active Directory. Any new users that are added will automatically be deployed. They don't have integration with G Suite like Office 365, but as I mentioned, it still does work with it and offers the same benefits. And then the biggest thing is the continuous 24/7 monitoring. As I mentioned before, IronScales is always scanning the inboxes. It's whereas the pre-delivery or email gateway solutions, once it gets past that, there's no more protection afforded to the end user's mailbox. So, as I mentioned, polymorphic attacks, those are becoming more and more common. IronScales can mitigate or protect against those. Next up is the artificial protection that IronScales affords. So they look at the entire organization's email behavior. So each individual, they will monitor, and a little caveat, it takes about 2 weeks for IronScales to really get a lay of the land and really identify how each person, what their behavior looks like, who they're emailing, they're getting emails from, for it to become 100% effective. But they have 8 different banners that I showed you earlier for different phishing attempts, and those are you can edit those, and so that's kind of another example of one of the banners. So you can change this and put whatever you want within that. They have impersonation protection, which a lot of the traditional solutions do afford with DKIM and DMARC, but this goes a step beyond that. They have, on top of that, the Outlook plugin, as I mentioned. So this is where end user, if they see that InMail banner, they would click that report phishing button, which would then send it to the administrator to then further confirm whether or not it is a actual threat or a false positive. And this is where the resolution center comes into play. And I'll show you guys what that looks like here in a second at the end of this presentation. But this, and Chris really wanted me to emphasize this, and this is actually what I really talk about the most, or at least highlight when it comes to IronScales, is Themis. So this was launched about a year ago, and this is their automated remediation service. So Themis, based off the Greek goddess, is a way to actually reduce the amount of time the emails will sit in those end users' inbox, because even if a potential phishing email is sent there and it'll sit in their inbox until end user actually reports it. Well, what Themis will do is actually send those to quarantine based on a threshold that you set. So say if 80% is a default, and we say, all right, Themis, Any emails that you are 80% confident or higher is a potential phishing email, automatically remediate and quarantine. So this will save whoever is administrating or managing that resolution center a lot of time. And this is, so if someone does report an email, I've done this once before, it was actually a legitimate one. It was a gift card from WebRoot. I got a lot of flack from my coworkers, but they'll get this red banner if, say, I report that, and it'll say this is reported as malicious. Now, if multiple people report it, then that'll actually be pulled from every single user's inbox. But Themis, and I'll go over the packages, I highly suggest at a bare minimum to get the package with Themis just because of the benefits afforded with that. Now, security awareness training. It does offer phishing campaigns and videos as well. So you kind of have that second layer of protection. So they have 296 different templates. These are all in-house proprietary ones. They're all white labeled. You can edit them however you want. You can even create your own. So they do different different attacks, via attachments, URL, or SMS, even text. And then the landing pages for failed attempts. So like I said, it's highly customizable. And then each time someone clicks and falls prey to one of these phishing campaigns, it will then provide them with a training video. Actually, I want to go back there. Well, one of the other things too with Iron Scales is that they actually, you can set it to where it is on a user basis as far as what level of difficulty they will interact with when it comes to the phishing emails. So if an end user is constantly clicking on these fake phishing campaigns, they're going to adjust those according to that person's level. Whereas if someone is on point and they're always reporting them, they're going to slowly adjust that difficulty level and increase it for them. So it's end user specific when it comes to that training as well. All right, so for the different packages, so you have the basic, and this was the 3 that I mentioned with Iron Sights, Iron Traps, and Federation. Then you have Core, which will include the phishing simulation training, and then Themis. This is the one that I suggest at a minimum most people go with. And then Core Plus is going to add their malware and URL protection. So Iron Scales does have ATP, which they leverage to a third-party provider. And one thing that's unique about this is that you can actually layer Iron Scales ATP on top with another email gateway's ATP, like a Proofpoint or Microsoft ATP. So you have that double layer of protection in case something gets through the email gateway. And that's Iron Shield is what it's called. And then lastly, for the ultimate package, they did add Ningio, which is an additional training program, which it's, and I'll go over that here in a second, but it's a little bit different than their in-house videos. And so what the biggest difference is they're animated. And a lot of partners will say, well, that's dumb. Like, why would I want to use something that's, cartoons? But what Ningio found was that these animated videos actually hold users' attention far better than these bland, boring, generic videos that the majority of vendors utilize. So it's anime-based, animation-based, I like to say. And it's actually created by an ex-Pixar employee. So for most partners, this is kind of a premium package that a lot of them might not really be interested in. For the most part, though, like I said, either the Core or Core Plus are the 2 that I recommend the most, unless you just have a customer that wants the best of the best, and maybe they have customer or employees that like animation. Me personally, I don't have a lot of partners that utilize this, but just so you're aware. So that's the end of the presentation. I got a couple minutes. I want to show just one thing on the portal. Where is it here? Okay, so for the administrators that would be managing iron scales, when you log in, this is what the dashboard or the summary page is going to look like. And really what I want to highlight is just the resolution center here. So when you come in, here's going to be the active incidents that people have reported. So you can go here and look through all the details for that specific email. You know, it has the sender, return path, domain age. So a lot of things that you can quickly tell whether or not this is actually a legitimate threat. And then from there, as I mentioned, you mark it as a phishing attack, false positive, or spam. And then last thing I want to show real quick is just the settings for changing the so there's completely white label, so you can change this however you want. But let's see here. Bear with me 1 second. Oh, they changed this up on me. Okay, I was just going to show where you could edit the labels, but you guys understand, you get the idea on that. I do have another meeting I have to run to, but real quick, any questions, anything I can answer, I can stay for a couple minutes. I hope this was, you know, worth your time here.
I know Travis has to jump real quick. So Travis, thanks again for helping out. Great presentation. Appreciate it, dude.
The obvious question for Taylor is, how is it priced?
So pricing, and this is because we're a distributor, you know, I can't go over pricing right here because you know, obviously we have end users, and I can't give the cost for just depending on who's in this room. But
I can answer that, because I mean, as for BIMA and for Enable, is the packages range from about $250 a user up to $5 a user at the upper end, and depending on which package per month. And then there is room in that as for the larger user bases to be flexible on that. So that's a conversation for BIMA and Enable. And of course, we can do deeper demos one-on-one if you want to look at configurability and how it works. That's
a lot more than we spend for KnowBe4.
Sure, and it's very different product than what KnowBe4 does as well. And so that's part of the, you know, part of what's being shown here is a lot more active involvement in actually working with the content in your mailbox, removing it, versus just the training. And so that's obviously a very different product.
Yeah. So, and as I mentioned before, KnowBe4 actually just launched essentially a imitation of iron scales. I don't know what that's priced. I don't know much about it because it's so new. But I mean, that goes to show that, you know, iron scales is doing something right in taking a proactive approach, as Chris mentioned. Now, I definitely advocate to have that security awareness training component for the end users, but it only takes one person to accidentally click on a phishing email, and then the negative impact from that can be drastic. And so, yes, it does cost a little bit more than KnowBe4's, just security awareness training. I can't compare it to what their new product is, but this is something that, as I mentioned before, will take the onus off of the end user. Because I used to be in finance. I worked for a large financial institution, and we had a pretty young sales force as well as some older employees. And every time that we got the security trainings that we had to complete, the majority of my coworkers would just click through everything as quickly as possible, get to the end of the test, complete it, and then they're done. They didn't really learn anything from it. They just were trying to meet the requirements. So obviously that's not everyone, but this is something, it's an extra layer of protection in case you have employees that will do that.
So, all right, Taylor, I know you've got another meeting to run to. So
yeah. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate you letting me speak here today. Like I said, I hope it was a valuable use of your time. And yeah, if anyone's interested, talk to Chris or any of your other partners, and they'll be more than happy to set you up or run a customer trial for you. Awesome. Take care, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, Taylor. Appreciate it,
Yep.
man.
You're welcome, Jason.
And I'll say we've been using iron scales for over a year now. And yeah, it's really great. We didn't do the training stuff because, as people mentioned in the chat, we knew that leadership probably would not enforce it. So it was like, well, can we put a tool in place that will at least protect everybody? And from the IT side, man, it's been really easy to use, simple to manage. We're just on the basic tier, so we don't have the Themis piece. But yeah, really, really good stuff. Any other general questions? I mean, Travis is gone, but Chris and Carl are around. We want to spend a few moments before we head into the small group time.
I do want to add a thing that has been a recent kind of security / other things in the church awareness is we're really becoming very, very aware of attack surface when it comes to phishing and account exploits, and we're starting to crack down in our own use in our clients of how user accounts are created, why they exist, how licenses are assigned. Of course, Microsoft has transitioned to saying volunteers are not staff and can't be on donation licenses. And that's kind of part of the picture, but really transitioning to a user account that can be logged into as a person. So a licensed user is a user, it has MFA, it has all the protections in place, getting away from accounts that can be logged into that aren't actually people's, focusing more on shared mailboxes, using groups and teams and all of that, really helping to reduce the attack surface. We tend in the church to not think about it because, oh, it's just a free license, let's throw that on a mailbox and then 50 people have the password, or things like that. And those attack surfaces are becoming a bigger deal, and not so much because somebody's going to get in that mailbox and get all the data in it, but more importantly, use it as a launching pad for phishing your own employees, phishing external employees, information discovery, for penetrating the environment. There's just so many things that exposure can give. So that's just become a very recent thing to be aware of as you're thinking big picture in your security posture.
I'll just kind of reiterate. Travis got this so right. Do the easy stuff, and by some definition of easy, like what if you see something in front of you and say, "Man, maybe I can tackle that." Go do it, and then look at the next thing and look at the next thing, and just keep moving it forward. You can do it. Like I think there was some time period a few years ago, particularly like 5 or 6 years ago, when this started to become a hot topic, where there's a lot of legitimate reasons why it was very difficult to do things and legitimate blockers. And I think over the last 5 or 6 years, there's not a lot of excuses anymore. It's energy, but you can do it.
And maybe at some point down the road, maybe you could walk us through the whole passwordless idea. I think that is
I
really
don't use a password on my computers anymore. So if
really cool.
Face ID, or not Face ID, if Windows Hello or Face ID doesn't recognize me, I just get a text on my phone, I hit a button and it lets me in no matter where I'm at. It's pretty cool. We're getting there.
Yeah. If we continue to do this thing next year, I think that should be one of the presentations. Well, if there's nothing else, it's breakout time. You should be able to hit the breakout button. Matt has gone through and got all your breakout rooms. There they go.